Saint Tarcisius was a young Christian who lived in Rome during the 3rd century, primarily known for his heroism in protecting the Eucharist. Little is known about his life, but his devotion and courage are widely recognized in the history of the Church. He lived during a time of Christian persecution, where professing the faith could cost one's life. Despite his youth, he demonstrated extraordinary faith and strength. As an acolyte, Tarcissus assisted the clergy during liturgical celebrations, standing out for his deep love for Christ and the Eucharist. His simple life was marked by intense dedication to prayer and service, serving as an example to other young members of the Christian community. He deeply understood the importance of the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, the center of Christian life. The story of Saint Tarcisius has been preserved by tradition, passed down by his contemporaries and through the devotion of Christians throughout the centuries. He is remembered not only as a martyr but as a symbol of unwavering faith, showing how God's grace can work powerfully at any age. His life, though short, had a profound impact on the Church. During the reign of Emperor Valerian, from 253 to 260 AD, the persecution of Christians was particularly severe, with decrees banning Christian worship and ordering the imprisonment of religious leaders. In this hostile environment, Tarcissus witnessed his faith. Early Christians had to gather in secret to celebrate the Eucharist and other sacraments, using the catacombs of Rome as places of worship. Under these conditions, the early Church developed, marked by deep faith and a willingness to embrace martyrdom. Tarcissus grew up in this environment, surrounded by examples of courage and devotion. From a young age, Tarcissus showed an extraordinary devotion to the Eucharist, deeply understanding the mystery of Christ's real presence. For him, the Eucharist was not just a rite but the living presence of Jesus, whom he ardently desired to receive and adore. As an acolyte, he was always close to the altar, actively participating in liturgical celebrations with great reverence. His devotion was also evident in his desire to protect the sacrament. During the persecutions, the Eucharist was a target for desecration, and Tarcissus took on the dangerous task of transporting the consecrated host to imprisoned Christians. He did so with great zeal, understanding the importance of what he carried. His martyrdom was the culmination of his devotion. Determined to protect the consecrated host, Tarcissus faced death with courage, showing that the Eucharist was more valuable than life itself. His sacrifice is remembered as a testimony to the transformative power of the Eucharist, inspiring Christians worldwide to cherish this priceless treasure. The martyrdom of Saint Tarcisius is the climax of his life of faith. Chosen to carry the Eucharist to imprisoned Christians, he accepted the mission, fully aware of the risk. As he walked, he was approached by a group of pagan youths who, suspecting he carried something valuable, began to question him. Tarcissus, determined to protect the Eucharist, refused to hand over the sacrament, even in the face of threats. The youths, enraged, brutally attacked him, trying to force him to open his hands. Tarcissus resisted until the end, protecting the host with his life. After his death, Christians recovered his body and found the consecrated host intact, recognizing the sacrifice he made to protect the real presence of Christ. Saint Tarcisius is recognized as the patron saint of altar servers and acolytes worldwide. His life and martyrdom are powerful examples for those who serve at the altar, highlighting the importance of the Eucharist and liturgical service. Tarcissus demonstrated that serving at the altar is a form of personal sanctification, carrying out his duties with faith, devotion, and love. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius is strong among young people, who see in him a model of courage and fidelity. He teaches that holiness is not a matter of age but of commitment to Christ. Many altar servers celebrate his feast day on August 15th, renewing their commitment to liturgical service, inspired by Tarcissus' example. Saint Tarcisius remains a symbol of how youth can be dedicated to the service of God. He teaches us that serving at the altar is an opportunity to grow in holiness, encouraging young people to follow his example of love for the Eucharist and fidelity to Christ. The example of Saint Tarcisius had a profound impact on the early church. His martyrdom, occurring amid intense persecution, served as a powerful example of faith for Christians, especially for the young, who were inspired by his dedication and courage in defending the Eucharist. Tarcissus' story quickly spread among Christians in Rome and beyond, being celebrated as a martyr of the Eucharist. At that time, the witness of the martyrs strengthened the Church, and Tarcissus, despite his youth, was recognized as one of these heroes of the faith, encouraging others to remain steadfast. His influence was particularly significant among young Christians, showing that holiness and courage are not limited to adults. Many young people found in Tarcissus a model to follow, drawing inspiration from his life as proof that God can work great things through those who give themselves to him. In addition to being an example of courage, Tarcissus contributed to the development of Eucharistic devotion in the early Church. His martyrdom emphasized the importance of the sacrament and the need to protect it, intensifying the early Christians' reverence for Christ's real presence. The memory of Saint Tarcisius has been preserved throughout the centuries, and his influence is still felt in the Church. He is venerated as a saint who, through his sacrifice, demonstrated the value of faith in the Eucharist, remaining an example of devotion and courage for Christians of all generations. The martyrdom of Saint Tarcisius holds profound significance for the Church, highlighting the central importance of the Eucharist in Christian faith. He died protecting the real presence of Christ, the Church's greatest treasure, reminding us that Christian faith is not just belief but total commitment to Christ, even unto death. This sacrifice also highlights the purity and innocence of faith. Tarcissus, despite his youth, demonstrated deep faith, lived out in a concrete and courageous way. His martyrdom is a call to all Christians, especially the young, to live their faith with fervor and devotion. The story of Tarcissus challenges Christians to reflect on the value they place on the Eucharist. In times when faith may be challenged, Tarcissus' example invites us to rediscover the centrality of the Eucharist in our lives, remembering that it is the heart of our faith. Moreover, Tarcissus' martyrdom highlights the power of God's grace, which strengthens even the youngest to face great challenges. His life is proof that God can work through those who sincerely give themselves to him, transforming sacrifice into glorification of God. The martyrdom of Tarcissus reminds us that the Christian faith is a faith of martyrs. His story challenges everyone to be faithful to the end, willing to sacrifice everything out of love for Christ, exemplifying how faith can lead to great acts of heroism. The canonization of Saint Tarcisius is a testimony to his holiness and the impact of his life on the Church. Although the formal process of canonization did not exist in his time, his veneration as a saint began shortly after his martyrdom. He was honored as a martyr, a recognition of holiness by the Christians of Rome. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius quickly spread after his death. His story was recorded in hagiographic texts, and he was venerated as an example of purity and courage, especially by the young and by acolytes. The Church recognized his influence and considered him worthy of veneration as a saint, confirming his cult over the centuries. The official recognition of Saint Tarcisius as a saint includes his inclusion in the Roman Martyrology, the official register of saints of the Catholic Church. Although there is no specific date for his canonization, his feast is celebrated on August 15th, and his story continues to inspire Christians around the world. The canonization of Saint Tarcisius also highlights the importance of holiness in youth. He is one of the youngest saints of the Church, and his life demonstrates that holiness can be lived from an early age. By canonizing him, the Church acknowledges that God's grace can work powerfully at any age. Saint Tarcisius continues to be a central figure in popular devotion. His canonization reaffirms the importance of the Eucharist in Christian life and the need to protect and revere it, inspiring the faithful to follow his example of purity, courage, and devotion. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius has endured throughout the centuries, reflecting the lasting impact of his life and martyrdom on the Church. From the earliest years after his death, he was venerated as a martyr of the Eucharist, with his story being passed down from generation to generation. This devotion is particularly strong among the young and those who serve at the altar, who see in him a model of purity, courage, and dedication to Christ. During the Middle Ages, the story of Saint Tarcisius continued to inspire the faithful. Churches and chapels were dedicated to him, and his image was depicted in stained glass windows and paintings, often holding the Eucharist with reverence. His devotion was especially promoted by confraternities and brotherhoods dedicated to liturgical service, who considered him an example to follow. In modern times, devotion to Saint Tarcisius has been revitalized, particularly with the liturgical movement and the increased active participation of the laity in the liturgy. As the patron of acolytes, he gained prominence in many parishes, where celebrations in his honor are held. Tarcissus is remembered as a young man who gave his life for Christ, continuing to be an example of faith and dedication. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius is also expressed in prayers and novenas, in which the faithful ask for his intercession to be strengthened in faith and in devotion to the Eucharist. He is especially invoked by those who serve at the altar, asking for help to perform their duties with reverence and love. Over the centuries, Saint Tarcisius has remained a central figure in Catholic devotion and spirituality. His life and martyrdom are proofs of the power of faith and love for Christ, especially in youth. Devotion to him continues to be a source of inspiration and strength for Christians, especially those dedicated to liturgical service. The figure of Saint Tarcisius has inspired countless artistic representations over the centuries, reflecting his importance in popular devotion and church history. His image is often associated with the Eucharist, depicting him as a young man holding the consecrated host with reverence, reminding us of his sacrifice and the importance of the Eucharist in Christian life. In sacred art, Saint Tarcisius is often depicted in scenes highlighting his martyrdom, showing him being attacked while protecting the Eucharist. These images are present in stained glass windows, paintings, and statues, especially in churches dedicated to him. These visual representations help keep alive the memory of his courage and devotion. Literature has also celebrated Saint Tarcisius, with various works dedicated to telling his story and highlighting his virtues. Christian writers and poets have used his life as an example of purity and unwavering faith, creating hymns and poems that exalt his sacrifice. His story has been narrated in devotional books and biographies, educating and inspiring the faithful, especially the young. Popular culture also perpetuates the memory of Saint Tarcisius. In many Catholic communities, especially in Italy, he is celebrated with processions and festivals. These communal celebrations keep alive the devotion to Tarcisius, passing down his story from generation to generation. Art and culture play a crucial role in preserving and disseminating his legacy, ensuring that his example continues to inspire the faithful. Saint Tarcisius is an example of how youth can be a time of intense spiritual growth. Tarcisius dedicated his life to Christ from an early age, showing that young people are also called to live out their faith fully. His courage in protecting the Eucharist, even in the face of death, is a powerful testimony that young people can be active defenders of the faith. The life of Saint Tarcisius also highlights the importance of liturgical service as a path to holiness for young people. As an acolyte, He was deeply involved in the Church's liturgical life, which helped him grow in his faith. His example inspires young people to dedicate themselves to altar service with reverence and love, seeing it as a way to draw closer to God and serve the community. Tarcissus is a model for young people who face challenges in living out their faith. He shows that faith can provide the strength and courage to overcome any obstacle. In a world where young people often face pressures to conform to secular norms, Tarcissus encourages them to remain steadfast in their faith, even if it requires sacrifices. He is an example of how youth can be a time of vibrant and courageous witness to Christ. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius strengthens the ecclesial community, encouraging young people to actively participate in the life of the Church. He inspires young people to see faith as an exciting and meaningful adventure where they can make a real difference. Tarcissus is a reminder that young people are a vital part of the Church and that, like him, they can be saints and heroes of faith in their own lives. Saint Tarcisius is a remarkable example of how Christians are called to defend their faith, even in the face of persecution or threat. His life teaches us that faith is not just an internal belief but also action and witness. Tarcissus did not hesitate to protect the Eucharist, even knowing it could cost him his life. He is a model of how we should be willing to defend what is sacred. Defending the faith, as demonstrated by Saint Tarcisius, involves courage and sacrifice. He was fully aware of the dangers he faced, but his faith in Christ and in the real presence in the Eucharist motivated him to move forward. His story challenges us to examine our own commitment to the faith and consider how far we are willing to go to defend it. He reminds us that faith must be protected and lived with seriousness. Saint Tarcisius also teaches us about the importance of acting with discernment and wisdom in defending the faith. He did not act recklessly, but with a deep sense of responsibility and reverence for the sacrament he carried. His attitude reminds us that defending the faith does not mean being aggressive or provocative, but rather acting with courage and respect, always guided by love for Christ and the Church. His life reminds us that defending the faith can involve risks and challenges. Tarcissus faced hostility but was not intimidated. In a world where Christian faith is often challenged or misunderstood, his example encourages us to be firm in our belief and defend it with conviction. He teaches us that true fidelity to Christ involves courage and sacrifice. Tarcissus shows us that defending the faith is an essential part of Christian witness. His sacrifice is a reminder that faith is something worth fighting for and, if necessary, suffering for. He challenges us to be true defenders of our faith, not just in words but in concrete actions. Tarcissus inspires us to be valiant witnesses of Christ, ready to defend the faith in all circumstances. Saint Tarcisius has a special influence on vocations, especially vocations to liturgical service and the priesthood. His life of dedication and service at the altar serves as a powerful example for those who feel called to serve God. He shows that serving at the altar can be the beginning of a life of holiness and total dedication to Christ. For those who feel a calling to the priesthood, Tarcissus is an example of how altar service can nurture and strengthen that call. As an acolyte, he was deeply involved in the liturgy and the Eucharist, which helped him grow in his faith and devotion. He demonstrates that serving at the altar is a way to draw closer to God and discern the call to the priestly vocation. Tarcissus also influences vocations to lay service in the Church. Many acolytes and altar servers who start by serving at the altar end up finding their calling in other areas of ecclesial life, such as catechists, Eucharistic ministers, or members of other ministries. His example teaches that every form of service in the Church is valuable and can be an expression of our Christian vocation. Moreover, Tarcissus is a source of inspiration for those who feel called to defend the faith in their daily lives. His courage and dedication to the Eucharist show that all Christians, regardless of their specific vocation, are called to be faithful witnesses of Christ. He teaches us that our vocation is to live our faith with integrity and courage, always ready to defend what is sacred. The influence of Saint Tarcisius on vocations is a reminder that we are all called to serve God in some way. He challenges us to discern our calling with seriousness and follow where God leads us. His life encourages everyone to respond to God's call with courage and devotion, knowing that, like him, we can make a great difference by living our Christian vocation faithfully. The Feast of Saint Tarcisius, celebrated on August 15th, is a special occasion for the Church, especially for altar servers who have him as their patron. This day offers an opportunity to reflect on Tarcisius' life and sacrifice, renewing the commitment to follow his example of devotion to the Eucharist and service to Christ. The celebration is marked by masses, processions, and activities that highlight Tarcisius' importance in the life of the Church. During this feast, many altar servers participate in special celebrations, where they renew their vows of service at the altar. These celebrations remind everyone of the importance of liturgical service and how it can be a path to holiness. Young people who serve at the altar are encouraged to see in Tarcisius a model of dedication and reverence, following his example in their own lives. The feast also strengthens devotion to the Eucharist. Celebrations often include adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, reflecting the love and devotion Tarcisius had for Christ present in the Eucharist. The faithful are invited to renew their own devotion and recognize the Eucharist as the center of their Christian life, making the Feast of Saint Tarcisius a moment of profound spiritual renewal. In addition to liturgical celebrations, the Feast of Saint Tarcisius is marked by community events involving the parish and the diocese, strengthening the sense of community and promoting devotion to the saint. He is remembered as a young man who gave everything for Christ, and his feast celebrates both his sacrifice and his continued influence in the Church. Thus, the Feast of Saint Tarcisius is a moment of great importance for the Church, especially for the young people who have him as their patron. It offers an opportunity to reflect on the value of the Eucharist, the importance of liturgical service, and the example of courage and devotion that Tarcisius left us. Celebrating his feast is to renew faith and commitment to Christ, following the luminous example of Saint Tarcisius. The Eucharist was the center of Saint Tarcisius' life, shaping his faith and witness to the point of his martyrdom. From a young age, he understood the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and nurtured a deep devotion to this sacrament. For him, the Eucharist was not just a symbol but the true presence of Christ, which he revered with all his being. This understanding motivated him to give his life to protect the Blessed Sacrament. Tarcisius' devotion to the Eucharist is a powerful example for all Christians. He shows us the importance of valuing and protecting the Eucharist, recognizing it as the Church's greatest treasure. In times of persecution, Tarcisius risked his life to ensure that the Eucharist reached those who needed it most, challenging us to reflect on our own attitude toward the Eucharist and to renew our commitment to this sacrament. Tarcisius' life highlights the Eucharist as a source of strength and courage. He found in the Eucharist the strength needed to face the challenges and dangers that confronted him. His willingness to protect the sacrament, even unto death, is a testimony to the depth of his faith. Tarcisius teaches us that the Eucharist is not just a liturgical act but a source of spiritual life that enables us to live our faith with courage and determination. Moreover, his devotion to the Eucharist reminds us of the importance of regularly attending Mass and receiving communion. Tarcisius understood that in the Eucharist, we receive Christ himself, and his life challenges us to value this incomparable gift. He teaches us that the Eucharist is essential to our spiritual life and that we should approach it with reverence and devotion. The life of Saint Tarcisius invites us to reflect deeply on the role of the Eucharist in our own lives. He reminds us that the Eucharist is the center of Christian faith and that it must be protected and revered with the utmost respect. Tarcissus' devotion to the Eucharist is an example of how this sacrament can transform lives and lead to acts of great holiness and sacrifice. He challenges us to live a life centered on the Eucharist, recognizing in it the living presence of Christ. The witness of Saint Tarcisius continues to live in the Church, inspiring new generations to follow his example of devotion and courage. His story, passed down from generation to generation, is proof of the enduring power of Christian witness. Even centuries after his death, Tarcissus remains a model of how faith can be lived heroically, regardless of age or circumstances. Tarcissus is especially relevant in times of persecution or challenges to Christian faith. His willingness to sacrifice everything for love of Christ is a testimony that resonates in contexts where Christians face similar difficulties. His life reminds us that Christian faith, even when lived in adverse situations, can flourish and produce fruits of holiness. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius continues to influence the spiritual formation of young people. He is often presented as a model during catechesis and the formation of altar servers, encouraging young people to live their faith seriously and with dedication. Tarcissus' example helps shape a new generation of faithful, courageous Christians deeply committed to Christ and the Church. Moreover, Saint Tarcisius is a living example of how devotion to the Eucharist can transform lives. His story continues to be a source of inspiration for those who wish to deepen their faith and their relationship with Christ. Tarcissus shows us that true devotion to the Eucharist is not limited to worship but is expressed in concrete actions, such as the protection and defense of the sacrament in times of need. The witness of Saint Tarcisius is a living legacy that continues to inspire and guide the Church. His life and martyrdom are examples of how faith can be a transformative force, even amid adversity. He challenges us to live our faith with the same courage and dedication, recognizing that as Christians, we are called to be faithful witnesses of Christ in all circumstances. Tarcissus' witness is a constant call to holiness and defense of the faith. This young saint is a luminous example of faith, courage, and devotion to the Eucharist. His life and martyrdom are powerful testimonies of how Christian faith can transform lives and inspire generations. He teaches us that holiness is accessible to all, regardless of age, and that true love for Christ requires courage and sacrifice. His memory, preserved by the Church throughout the centuries, continues to inspire Christians of all ages to live their faith with the same dedication and reverence he demonstrated. By following the example of Saint Tarcisius, we are challenged to value the Eucharist as the greatest treasure of our faith and to defend Christian values with courage in all circumstances. May his life and witness continue to guide and inspire the Church, now and forever. Saint Tarcisius, defender of the Eucharist, pray for us.